Elliot Gray stared out the window of his home office, his mind drifting from the logo design on his screen to the mundane but reliable rhythm of his life. Outside, their sleepy suburban street lay in its usual tranquility, a jogger with a golden retriever, the faint hum of a passing lawnmower, the school bus pulling away at the corner. Elliot sighed, feeling the familiar contentment of routine. His work as a mid-level graphic designer wasn't thrilling, but it paid the bills and let him pursue his passion for painting on weekends. His marriage to Clara was equally steady, built on 10 years of quiet companionship. They had settled into their routines, dinners together, weekends spent gardening or visiting her parents, but over the past few months, Elliot had noticed cracks in their comfortable veneer. Nothing alarming at first, a slight distance in Clara's touch, her habit of retreating into her phone after dinner, the odd way her laughter sounded different when she took calls in another room. It was easy to dismiss these as quirks of a long-term marriage, until the packages began arriving. Initially, Elliot thought nothing of them. Clara had always loved shopping, delighting in quirky knickknacks and artisanal finds. But now the deliveries came almost daily. Elliot would find small, neatly wrapped parcels on their doorstep when he returned from work, and Clara always intercepted them quickly, stashing them in the hall closet without explanation. When he asked, she would smile dismissively, saying, "Oh, just something for the house," or, "You'll see soon enough." But Elliot never did. The phone calls followed. At odd hours of the day, Clara would step into another room, her voice lowering to a murmur. She'd emerge cheerful, brushing off his inquiries with vague excuses, work stuff or catching up with an old friend. The tension gnawed at Elliot, subtle but relentless, like a splinter buried deep under his skin. That it was a Wednesday morning when the pieces began to align. Elliot feigned illness, claiming a fever to stay home from work. He told himself it was for a mental health day, but the truth was more insidious. He wanted to see Clara's day as she lived it, without the filter of her explanations. From his seat on the couch, he could see the front door clearly. It wasn't long before the courier arrived. A tall man in his late 20s, maybe early 30s, with the kind of confident grin that made Elliot feel uncomfortably self-conscious. He watched as Clara greeted him, her smile warm, the faintest tilt to her head that Elliot hadn't seen in years. They exchanged a few words, laughter spilling between them like shared secrets. When she reached for the package, their hands brushed, lingering just a moment too long. Elliot's stomach knotted. That touch, it wasn't incidental. Something unspoken passed between them, as palpable as the late summer heat outside. He watched Clara close the door, the package cradled in her arms, her face lit with an expression he couldn't place. Was it guilt? Excitement? Whatever it was, it wasn't for him. For the rest of the day, Elliot replayed the scene in his head. He berated himself for overreacting. Surely it was nothing. But doubt settled into his mind, insidious and stubborn. That evening, Clara was her usual cheerful self, chatting about her plans for the weekend while she prepared dinner. Elliot responded automatically, his mind elsewhere, haunted by the courier's grin and the glint in Clara's eyes. Unable to shake the unease, Elliot started keeping a journal. At first, it felt absurd, writing down Clara's every glance and movement as though piecing together a crime. But the act was oddly therapeutic, giving structure to his chaotic thoughts. He noted every late-night outing, every package delivery, and every time she retreated to the bedroom with her phone. The next week, Elliot stayed home again. This time, he positioned himself by the window with a book he didn't intend to read. Like clockwork, the courier arrived. Once more, Clara greeted him with that too bright smile. This time, Elliot noticed her leaning slightly toward the man, as though drawn by some invisible force. He watched, helpless and disbelieving, as their hands brushed again. The exchange was brief, but it confirmed what Elliot had feared. Something was happening, and he didn't know how to stop it. By the time Clara returned inside, Elliot was already crafting scenarios in his mind. Was she having an affair? Was it emotional, or had it crossed a line? The questions clawed at him, each one sharper than the last. He avoided confrontation, unsure whether he wanted the truth or preferred the fragile comfort of ignorance. Elliot's journal grew longer with each passing day. He recorded Clara's moods, her occasional distance, the nights she came home later than usual, the calls she wouldn't explain. The courier's image haunted him, his easy charm a sharp contrast to Elliot's quiet demeanor. Every detail fueled Elliot's inner turmoil, until even Clara's laughter felt like a betrayal. One evening, after another late-night call, Clara climbed into bed beside him, her hair damp from the shower. She smelled of lavender and something unfamiliar, something bitter and sharp. Elliot lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling as his mind spiraled. The life he had built with Clara, the trust they had nurtured, now seemed as fragile as glass. And Elliot wasn't sure if he could piece it back together once it shattered. Elliot paced the living room, the late afternoon sunlight cutting golden streaks across the walls. The journal lay open on the coffee table, filled with pages of observations and doubts. Every detail, the lingering glances, the hurried phone calls, the packages, pointed to something Clara refused to admit. The courier, Aaron, had become a shadow in their marriage, a presence Elliot couldn't ignore. His decision was made, he had to know the truth, even if it shattered him. When Clara announced she was heading out to run errands, Elliot feigned indifference. He kissed her cheek, his lips brushing skin that felt unfamiliar, and watched her leave. The moment her car disappeared down the street, he grabbed his keys and followed. He kept a safe distance, his heart pounding with a mix of adrenaline and dread. Clara's car pulled into the parking lot of a quaint coffee shop at the edge of town. Elliot parked across the street, his fingers gripping the steering wheel as he watched her step inside. Moments later, Aaron arrived. The courier looked just as Elliot remembered, confident, casual, exuding a charm that grated on him. Clara's face lit up as they exchanged greetings. She reached out to touch Aaron's arm, and Elliot felt his chest tighten. For nearly an hour, Elliot observed from the safety of his car. Their conversation was animated, punctuated by laughter and gestures that spoke of familiarity. When they stood to leave, Aaron placed a hand on Clara's back, guiding her toward the door. Elliot's hands trembled as he watched them walk away together, disappearing into the parking lot. He didn't follow. He couldn't. The weight of betrayal pressed down on him as he drove home, his thoughts a chaotic swirl of anger, sadness, and confusion. By the time Clara returned that evening, cheerful and unbothered, Elliot had resolved to confront her. "Who is Aaron?" he asked, his voice steady but his gaze piercing. Clara paused, caught off guard. "The courier," she said lightly, pulling off her coat. "He's just a friendly guy. You know, always around because of the deliveries." Elliot's jaw tightened. "I saw you with him today. At the coffee shop." Her expression shifted, surprise giving way to irritation. "Are you spying on me now?" she snapped. "I was having coffee, Elliot. That's all." "With the courier," he countered. "What's going on, Clara?" "Nothing," she said, her tone defensive. "Aaron's nice, that's all. He listens when I talk. But it's not what you're thinking. You're being ridiculous." Her dismissive attitude cut deep, but it only fueled Elliot's determination. After she went to bed that night, he stayed up, replaying the day's events in his mind. Clara's deflection wasn't enough to quell his suspicions. Something was happening, and he needed proof. The next day, while Clara was out, Elliot searched their bedroom. Guilt churned in his stomach as he rifled through her closet, but the nagging doubt was stronger. His hands brushed against a small box tucked behind a row of shoes. Pulling it out, he found a package wrapped in brown paper. It bore no shipping label, only Aaron's handwriting. With trembling fingers, Elliot tore the paper away. Inside was a spider-shaped pendant, its delicate legs curled around a gleaming black stone. The craftsmanship was intricate, almost unnerving in its realism. A folded note lay beneath the pendant, scrawled with a single line, "For my muse." Elliot stared at the note, the words burning into his mind. Muse. Aaron had given her this, not as a friend but as someone captivated by her. Rage boiled beneath Elliot's skin, tempered only by a growing sense of dread. What was Clara hiding? And why did this pendant feel so wrong? That night, Elliot struggled to sleep. The house felt oppressive, the darkness heavy with unspoken truths. He woke abruptly in the early hours, his chest tight with unease. Reaching for Clara, he found her side of the bed empty. Panic gripped him as he called her name, his voice echoing in the silent house that he found her in the backyard, standing barefoot in the damp grass. The moonlight bathed her in an eerie glow, her nightgown clinging to her as she stood unnaturally still. Her eyes were wide but vacant, staring at nothing. For a moment, Elliot froze, his breath catching in his throat. "Clara," he said, stepping closer. She didn't respond. Her stillness was unnerving, like a mannequin caught mid-movement. He reached out to touch her shoulder, and the moment his fingers brushed her skin, she shuddered violently, her eyes focused, and she blinked at him, confused. "Elliot? What are you doing out here?" "What am I doing?" he said, his voice trembling. "You were standing out here in a trance. What's going on?" Clara frowned, rubbing her arms as if suddenly aware of the chill. "I don't know," she murmured. "I must have. I don't remember coming outside." Elliot searched her face, looking for answers she didn't seem to have. "This isn't normal, Clara," he said, his tone edged with fear. "Something's wrong." Clara avoided his gaze, retreating toward the house. "I'm fine," she said quietly. "I just had a strange dream, that's all. Let's go back to bed." But as Elliot followed her inside, his mind churned with questions he couldn't ignore. The pendant, the note, the way Clara had stood under the moonlight as though drawn by an invisible force, it all felt connected. And in the pit of his stomach, Elliot knew the truth was darker than he had imagined. The house was unusually quiet when Elliot woke, his skin damp with sweat. His dreams had been vivid, filled with fragmented images of Clara, Aaron, and the spider pendant, each distorted and shifting like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle that refused to fit. He sat up, pressing a hand to his throbbing temple. The room felt too warm, the air heavy with an unplaceable tension. As he stepped into the kitchen, his eyes caught something scuttling across the floor. A spider. But not an ordinary one. It was large, too large, with a metallic sheen that caught the light like polished steel. Its legs moved with unnatural precision, its body pulsing as though alive in ways beyond mere biology. Elliot's skin crawled as he grabbed a magazine, rolling it into a makeshift weapon. The spider paused, its beady eyes seeming to fix on him. Elliot hesitated, the air charged with an inexplicable menace. Steeling himself, he swung. The impact was swift but unsatisfying. The spider darted away, and in his haste to corner it, Elliot felt a sharp sting on his hand. Pain shot up his arm, searing and electric. "Damn it," he hissed, clutching his hand. The spider was gone, disappearing into the shadows as though it had never been there. The bite mark was small, almost insignificant, but it throbbed persistently. By the time Clara returned home that evening, Elliot's hand had swollen, the flesh around the wound tinged with a faint metallic sheen. Clara barely noticed. She seemed distracted, her responses clipped and distant. "How was your day?" she asked mechanically, unpacking groceries without meeting his gaze. "Fine," Elliot lied, his voice weak. He watched her, noting the tension in her posture, the way her eyes flickered to the clock as though counting down to some unseen event. Over the next few days, the bite worsened. Elliot's strength ebbed away, leaving him pale and feverish. Sleep became a battlefield of nightmares, twisting shapes, whispers in languages he couldn't understand, and the spider's gleaming eyes watching him from the shadows. When he was awake, his mind was no better. Hallucinations blurred the lines between reality and paranoia. Clara's face seemed to shift in the dim light, her features sharpening, her smile too wide and too knowing. She began staying out late, her explanations vague and unsatisfying. "Just catching up with friends," she'd say, brushing him off. Elliot barely had the energy to argue, his body weakened but his mind trapped in an obsessive loop. He knew Aaron was involved. He knew the pendant was connected. He just didn't know how. One night, driven by feverish determination, Elliot turned to his laptop. He typed "spider-shaped pendant" into the search bar, his fingers trembling. What he found only deepened his unease. Articles and forums discussed rare spiders with venom known for inducing vivid hallucinations and altered states of consciousness. One name appeared repeatedly: the Widow Society. The group was described as a shadowy underground network that used these spiders in bizarre rituals. Participants sought enlightenment or power, depending on the source. Some claimed the society worshipped the spiders as symbols of transformation, their venom seen as a pathway to rebirth. Others whispered about darker purposes: control, manipulation, and destruction. Scrolling further, Elliot's heart skipped. A name stood out in the comments: Aaron Locke. Users mentioned him as a recruiter, someone who provided the pendants to chosen initiates. The words blurred on the screen as Elliot's pulse raced. Clara wasn't just entangled with Aaron, she was part of something far larger, far more dangerous than he had imagined. That night, Elliot confronted Clara, his voice hoarse and trembling. "What is this about, Clara?" "The pendant, Aaron, these spiders." Clara froze, her eyes widening before narrowing into something unreadable. "You've been snooping again," she said coldly. "Snooping," he spat. "I'm trying to save us. I've seen the bite, the pendant. This isn't just coincidence, Clara. You're involved with something, and it's destroying us." Clara's lips curled into a faint, almost pitying smile. "You don't understand, Elliot. You never have." "What don't I understand?" he demanded, his voice cracking. "Tell me, Clara, because I'm dying here, literally. This bite, these visions, they're real." Her gaze lingered on him, heavy with something like regret. "Maybe it's better if you don't know." With that, she turned and left, leaving Elliot alone with his unraveling thoughts. As his fever spiked, Elliot's hallucinations intensified. He saw spiders everywhere, their gleaming bodies weaving webs that stretched across the corners of his mind. But amidst the chaos, a resolve began to form. If Clara wouldn't tell him the truth, he would uncover it himself. The next day, Elliot logged into the forums again, diving deeper into the Widow Society's lore. He found stories of initiates who had been transformed, some gaining clarity, others driven mad. A few claimed the venom wasn't just hallucinogenic, it altered something fundamental in the mind, opening doors that were never meant to be unlocked. One post caught his eye. It detailed a gathering held in a secluded location, marked by a symbol, the spider pendant. Elliot's breath quickened as he noted the similarities to Clara's recent behavior. The post's author mentioned Aaron by name, describing him as a charismatic but dangerous figure who chose his recruits carefully. By the time Elliot shut his laptop, the pieces had formed a jagged but undeniable picture. Clara was slipping away, pulled into something far beyond her control. And unless Elliot acted soon, he feared he would lose her, and himself, to the spider's bite. Elliot's fevered mind raced as he sat in the car outside the courier depot, clutching a photograph of the spider pendant he had printed from the forums. The cryptic details of the Widow Society swirled in his thoughts like smoke, choking him with unanswered questions. Clara's involvement was no longer debatable, but he needed to understand why. And to do that, he had to confront Aaron Locke directly. When Aaron emerged from the depot, whistling as he carried a small package to his van, Elliot got out of his car. The sight of the man, too confident, too at ease, stoked Elliot's anger. He crossed the parking lot in quick strides, his voice sharp and unyielding. "Hey, Locke." Elliot called. Aaron turned, his face shifting from pleasant surprise to cautious wariness. "Elliot, right? What brings you here?" "I want answers," Elliot demanded, stepping closer. "What's going on between you and Clara?" Aaron frowned, shaking his head with exaggerated innocence. "I don't know what you mean. Clara's a nice lady. I deliver packages, and we talk sometimes. That's all." Don't lie to me. Elliot's voice cracked, raw with desperation. I know about the pendant. I know about the Widow Society. You've been dragging my wife into something sick. Aaron's calm demeanor cracked for the briefest moment, his gaze sharpening. Then he laughed, a low, unsettling sound. You're in over your head, Elliot. What does that mean? Elliot demanded. Tell me the truth. Aaron stepped closer, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. Sometimes the web you see isn't the one you're caught in. He tilted his head, his grin enigmatic. But if you're smart, you'll stop pulling at threads. You won't like where they lead. Before Elliot could respond, Aaron turned and climbed into his van, slamming the door behind him. The engine roared to life, and he drove off, leaving Elliot standing alone in the lot, seething with frustration, determined not to let Aaron escape unchallenged. Elliot jumped into his own car and tailed him. The courier made several stops, each one seemingly ordinary. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, Aaron's route veered into an industrial area on the outskirts of town. When he parked behind a cluster of warehouses, Elliot parked a safe distance away and waited. As Aaron disappeared inside one of the buildings, Elliot made his move. Creeping up to the van, he carefully opened the back doors, slipping inside. His heart pounded as he rummaged through the clutter, searching for anything that might give him answers. Amid the delivery manifests and tools, he found it, a folded map tucked into the sun visor. Marked on the map were several locations, one of which was the warehouse Aaron had just entered. Elliot slipped out of the van, clutching the map, and made his way to the warehouse. Peeking through a cracked window, he saw them, a group of people gathered in a circle, their faces obscured by masks resembling spiders. At the center stood Clara, her head bowed. Aaron stood beside her, holding a vial of shimmering black liquid. Elliot's breath caught as Aaron addressed the group, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. Tonight, our sister joins the web fully. Let the venom awaken her to the truth. Elliot watched in horror as Aaron uncorked the vial, dipping the spider-shaped pendant into the liquid before handing it to Clara. She hesitated, her hand trembling as she brought the pendant to her lips. Aaron murmured something inaudible, and Clara drank. The change was immediate. Clara's posture straightened, her eyes snapping open with an intensity Elliot had never seen. She exhaled sharply, her expression shifting to something euphoric, almost transcendent. The group chanted in unison, their voices a low, rhythmic hum. Elliot stumbled back, his pulse racing. He had seen enough. Retreating to his car, he gripped the steering wheel, his mind spinning. Clara wasn't cheating, not in the way he'd imagined. She was part of something far stranger and more dangerous. The truth crystallized in his mind like shards of broken glass. Clara wasn't just drawn to Aaron, she was drawn to the promise of transformation, of escape from the mundane life they had built together. The revelation hurt more than any imagined affair. Later that night, when Clara returned home, her movements were purposeful, almost unnervingly fluid. She found Elliot waiting in the kitchen, his face pale and strained. You were at the warehouse, he said bluntly. Clara froze, her eyes narrowing. You followed me? Damn right I did, Elliot snapped. I saw everything. The venom, the pendant, the chanting. What the hell is going on, Clara? Are you part of a cult? Clara sighed, her shoulders sagging. It's not a cult, she said softly. It's liberation. You wouldn't understand. Try me. Elliot's voice rose, his frustration spilling over. How could you get involved in something like this? With him? Her gaze softened, filled with an odd mixture of pity and sadness. Because I needed more, Elliot. More than this life, more than us. Don't you see? I've been suffocating. And Aaron, he showed me a way out. Aaron's manipulating you, Elliot said, his voice trembling. He's not offering freedom. He's controlling you. Clara shook her head, tears glistening in her eyes. No, Elliot. He's opened my eyes. The venom, it's not poison. It's truth. And for the first time, I feel alive. Elliot stared at her, his mind rejecting the words even as the cracks in their relationship came into focus. Clara's growing distance, her restlessness, her need for something more, it had all been leading to this moment. You don't have to do this, Elliot said, his voice breaking. You don't need Aaron or his lies. We can fix this. We can fix us. Clara hesitated, her expression torn. I love you, Elliot, she said finally. But I can't go back to the life we had. I've seen too much. Felt too much. The web, it's part of me now. As she turned and walked away, Elliot slumped against the counter, his world unraveling around him. The truth had been revealed, but it wasn't the one he had hoped for. And deep down, he feared he was already too entangled in the web to escape. Elliot sat at the edge of the bed, his fingers nervously tracing the scars on his swollen hand where the spider had bitten him days earlier. He'd tried to clean the wound, to dismiss it as an anomaly, but it festered, just as his thoughts had. Clara's transformation was undeniable, her once loving demeanor warped into something unrecognizable, a fervent zeal that scared him more than her distance ever had. Clara entered the room quietly, her expression pleading but determined. She knelt in front of him, taking his trembling hands in hers. Her touch sent a shiver through him, and Elliot hated that it still felt familiar. You have to trust me, she whispered. You don't understand yet, but you will. Aaron's not the enemy. Neither is the venom. It's a gift, Elliot. It showed me who I really am. It can do the same for you. He pulled his hands away, his stomach twisting. No, he said firmly. I won't become part of this cult. Clara flinched at the word but pressed on. It's not a cult. It's freedom. The venom strips away fear and doubt. You've been so lost, Elliot. So angry. This could help you. It could save us. Elliot stood abruptly, his voice rising. Save us? Clara, this isn't saving anything. It's destroying us. You've let that bastard Aaron twist your mind, and now you're trying to drag me into it. I won't do it. Her eyes shimmered with tears, but her voice was resolute. Then you'll never understand me. That night, Elliot packed a bag. He couldn't stay. Clara's pleas replayed in his mind as he threw clothes haphazardly into a suitcase. He knew she believed what she was saying, but he couldn't let her delusion consume him. The sound of a car engine idling outside froze him mid-motion. Peering out the window, he saw Aaron's van parked at the curb. Two figures stepped out, their faces obscured by shadows. Elliot's heart pounded as the realization struck, he wasn't going to be allowed to leave. He crept down the stairs, careful to avoid the creaking floorboards. As he reached the door, it burst open, the force sending him stumbling backward. Aaron stepped inside, flanked by two masked cult members. You can't leave, Aaron said simply, his voice calm but commanding. The web doesn't work like that. Elliot's hand tightened around the bag strap. Stay away from me, he warned, his voice trembling but defiant. Aaron stepped closer, his presence unnervingly steady. You're fighting something inevitable. The venom isn't just for Clara. It chose you too, Elliot. That bite on your hand? It's part of the connection now. There's no escape. Panic surged through Elliot as the masked figures advanced. He swung the bag at one of them, catching them off guard, and bolted for the back door. The night air was cool against his fevered skin as he sprinted into the woods behind the house. The sound of footsteps followed, twigs snapping and leaves rustling in their wake. A sharp cry rang out, followed by a sickening thud. Elliot risked a glance over his shoulder and saw one of the cult members writhing on the ground, their body convulsing. A spider with the same metallic sheen as the one in his kitchen scuttled away into the underbrush. Aaron's voice called out, furious. Leave him. Stay on, Elliot. Elliot pushed himself harder, adrenaline drowning out the burning in his lungs. His legs carried him through the darkness until the sound of pursuit faded. When he finally stopped, collapsing against a tree, he realized his bag was gone, discarded during the frantic chase. All he had was his resolve. Elliot returned home the next day, under the harsh light of morning. His limbs ached, and his mind buzzed with exhaustion, but he knew what had to be done. The pendant Clara had so cherished, the token that symbolized her connection to Aaron's web, had to be destroyed. That he found it hidden in her jewelry box, its black stone glinting malevolently. Setting it on the workbench in the garage, Elliot grabbed a hammer. His hand hovered over the tool, shaking as if the venom itself resisted what he was about to do. The first strike sent shards of black stone flying. He struck again and again until nothing remained but splinters of metal and pulverized gemstone. For the first time in days, Elliot felt a flicker of hope when Clara returned that evening. Her face was streaked with tears. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I want to come back. To us. I was wrong." Elliot's breath caught. "You mean it? You'll leave the cult?" She nodded, stepping closer. "I destroyed my pendant too. I told Aaron I couldn't do it anymore. I want to rebuild what we had." Relief washed over him as he pulled her into an embrace. For the first time in weeks, Clara felt like the woman he had fallen in love with, not the stranger who had drifted away. They stood together in the dimly lit kitchen, the weight of their shared pain beginning to lift, but then Elliot's vision blurred, the edges of his world turning soft and dreamlike. He blinked rapidly, trying to clear his head, but the sensation deepened. His chest tightened as he pulled back from Clara, looking down at his hand. There, faint but unmistakable, was a spider-shaped scar where the venom had bitten him. Clara's eyes widened as she followed his gaze. "Elliot," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What's wrong?" His thoughts swam, the words Aaron had spoken echoing in his mind. "Sometimes the web you see isn't the one you're caught in." Elliot's vision dimmed, and the world slipped away, leaving him wondering if he had ever truly escaped at all.